So it's a bear it all kind of conversation. All right, I'm here to distill all you need to know, whether you are an intending author, an existing author, or you're a writer, or you are a literary agent, or wherever you are, right, playing in the value chain, whatever aspect of the value chain of book publishing in Nigeria. This conversation is for you, and we're here to distill all that you essentially need to know. All right, so let's dive into our learning objectives. By the time we're done with this conversation, you should have understood the structure of Nigeria's publishing industry, and then how to find the right support for your work, assuming you're an author, that is. And then what are the publishing models that are available to authors, and how do you know what fits for you, right? Because they're certain, they're not all the same. There are different models. We're going to be talking about each of them. And at the end of this conversation, you should know exactly what works best for you based on your work, based on your circumstances, based on the dynamics of where you're at as an intending author, or even generally as a player in the industry. And a step-by-step guidance from manuscript to bookshelf. And then the fourth thing is the common mistakes that trip up authors. And then, of course, how to avoid them. Very important. You should get value for that investment. First, let me take a detour. Let me take a moment to tell you about us, Clasier Publishing, what we're about and what we do. Of course, you know that this conversation is brought to you by Clasier Publishing. So we stand as a publishing powerhouse, a book publishing powerhouse that collaborates with distinguished leaders, subject matter experts, thought leaders, accomplished professionals, and influential figures across various sectors. And what we do essentially is to help them in this particular audience to transform and publish their stories and their expertise as high impact books. All right. And the end is to amplify the author's voice, their brand, their influence, and their legacy. Now, we are motivated to do this because we came to a realization that most leaders in this part of the world do not tell their stories enough, do not share their experiences, and of course the learning that came along with those experiences over a process of time. And so we want to be the bridge, the go-between that helps to actualize this very vital aspect of living, because having experienced so much, having learned so much, that's not, you should not go to the grave with it, if I may use that word, that term, right? So you should put out a resource that becomes a mentorship asset, a mentorship tool to younger people. How did you navigate life? How did you attain the success that you've accomplished? What did you do? Where were the pitfalls, and how did you navigate them such that you succeeded? And this cuts across different aspects of life, career-wise, business, it could be religion, it could be marriage. It's a gamut of things. So we come in, look at your story, look at your successes, and even your failures, right? What are the lessons that we can draw from all of those, and be able to put it out as a powerful book to mentor and transform lives? And some of these stories can come in the form of fictional works. Some can come as memoirs, autobiographies, biographies, as the case may be. All right. So in a nutshell, this is what we're about as an organization. This is why we exist. And so far, we've been privileged to have worked with a number of authors and a number of leaders to put out very high value books in the market, which are, of course, making high level impacts. That said, let's dive right into our conversation for today. Let's begin by defining what book publishing is. Begin with the basics. So it is essentially the complete process, the end-to-end process of creating a book. In summary, that's what book publishing is. And so in that end-to-end, it's a number of things. And it begins from ideation. When you begin to think, you begin to nurse an idea or a thought that you have a book inside you that is begging to be released, right? So from that point, all the strings of activities that you undertake by way of embarking on that journey to actualizing this idea or story or thought in your head, right? All the way through to when a reader has it in their hand and they are consuming the book. That is book publishing. That journey is book publishing, all right? So from ideation, you go to the writing part, all right? Of course, even ideation, there are some dynamics around it, creating the outline, getting clarity, all of those things. And then to the actual writing. And then once you have the manuscript draft, you begin to talk about editing, you begin to talk about, designs, publishing, whether print or digital, marketing, promotion, distribution. And of course, that's when it gets to the end reader, all right? So all of those streams of activities constitute what we call book publishing. Very important that we understand this, very essential. So, of course, in that value chain, there are different stakeholders. There's the author, right? And then there are publisher. And even the publisher is made up of different professionals, different people who provide different expertise towards the actualization of the author's book. So it's like the author supplies the input, all right? And then the publisher supplies the expertise that now, or the ingredients that culminate in this output that becomes the book, which goes to the end consumer, right? So they're just using the business terms to analogize this. So I hope this is clear, right? So book publishing essentially is the full journey from idea to product. The product in this case being a book, all right? And of course, we know that there are different book formats. There's the hard copy book, there's the e-book, there is the audiobook. All right, so these are the essential formats, and whatever the output format is, all of that process is book publishing. Now, let's talk about the publishing models that are available out there. There are three book publishing models. Most people know two. Some just have a faint idea of what even those two are. They don't know the terminologies for them, traditional and self-publishing, right? That's what most people know. Some don't even know the terms for the ideas or the concept. They just know that, okay, when you talk about publishing, there is that sort of a provision where a publisher takes up your manuscript and they go to work and get you out. And there's also the provision where you can do it yourself, in this case, self-publishing. Most people have those faint ideas, and some know the terminology, some don't, all right? But of course, I am going to distill all of that in this conversation so that you can get a full grasp of it. But there's a third one that most people do not know, and it's called hybrid publishing. It's something I've observed over time, based on experience interacting with authors and even some other players in the space. So we're going to distill these in this conversation, which will be, this is the crux of why we're having this discuss. Traditional publishing, self-publishing, hybrid publishing. These are the three core publishing models in the book industry globally, not just even in Nigeria, right? But now, let me ask, has anybody encountered this term, independent publishing? Independent publishing. Because this is another term that is used very often in the industry, but a lot of people do not understand it. So what exactly is it? Is it a model of publishing? Is it a synonym to one of the other publishing models? There's just that conflict, for want of a better word, or that confusion that a lot of people have. And I want to help clarify that in this conversation. Some call it indie publishing, INDIE. Right, so just a short for independent. All right, so starting with the first, traditional publishing. What does it mean? This is the classic route where an author signs a contract with the publishing house, hands over their manuscript. So please pay attention from this point forward. Extra attention, I should say, because this is where I start to get into the crux of the conversation, right? So this is the classic route. That's what traditional publishing is now, where an author signs a contract with the publishing house, hands over their manuscript and the rights to it. Very important that you mind that. And then the publisher takes on everything about the publishing process at no cost to the author. So what this means is that publishers who play in this space, traditional publishers, right? They vet a manuscript that comes to them, right? Of course, tons of manuscripts get to them every year, every other month, in fact. And they vet those manuscripts and see the market potential because, of course, they are business people. So they assess the work. Who is the work intended for the target audience? Is the target audience large enough to make commercial sense of that work, right? Because they take up the full cost of that work. So they are buying the manuscript essentially. That's why I said the author signs a contract, handing over the rights and the manuscript to the publisher. And then they don't make any financial commitments upfront. The publisher takes on everything, right? So how it works is that the author submits a manuscript. Often this is done via a literary agent. However, in Nigeria, there seems to be a gap here. We hardly have literary agents, right? And part of the reasons for that is because we don't have very large, well-established traditional publishers as we have in the West, all right? We don't have very, publishers that are so big and so expansive in their network, their reach, such that they are not easily or readily reachable to an ordinary author. I'm able to use that word ordinary, right? So in this case, they need a literary agent, just like you have a real estate agent, right? That sort of connects the buyer to the developer to get property. The literary agents essentially connects the author to the publishing house. They look at your work. So if you were, like I said, we don't have much of this in Nigeria, but I'm just giving you the understanding of it. So you, as an author, you're done with your work and you reach out to a literary agent. He looks at your work. He understands the industry. He understands publishers. He knows what they are looking out for in a manuscript that they will accept. All right. So he vets the work and gives you his professional advice if there are areas that need to be touched up, if there are areas that need to be improved upon. After he has done that and you have reworked those areas of improvement that he advised you on, then he contacts a publisher for you. Of course, he has the network for it. All right. So, but back to our own client, our own space here, where this is not really a thing, the literary agency thing. So you can approach most traditional publishers in Nigeria directly, mostly on their website. You go to their website, you submit your manuscript, they look at it. If it makes commercial sense to them, they will contact you and let you know, give you feedback. And that means they are, accepting to work with you. And then the next thing is that the publisher accepts the manuscript and then they do everything. They provide all the relevant services. They edit the work, they provide all the designs, the cover, the page formatting, they handle the printing, the distribution, the marketing, all of it at no cost to the author. All right, very important. And then the next thing is that typically the author will get an advance, an upfront payment, especially if the work really, the publisher has a lot of confidence in that work, knowing that, okay, the market potential is huge. The potential market value of that work is significant based on the target audience of that book, right? So usually they will make a down payment, an upfront payment. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, no, it was January last year, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Prince Harry's book was published. And who was the publisher now? I'm trying to remember. Was it Penguin or so? I'm not so sure of the publisher now, but I think it was Penguin. And Prince Harry was paid $20 million upfront for that work, all right? And then the publisher, literally, because he has the name, and so there's no way a book by Prince Harry would not sell. So they approached him to do his work. They got the ghostwriter who worked with him to write the book, right? And then they paid him $20 million upfront for the publishing of that work. And then they went to market. Of course, the book sold, I've forgotten the figures now, but within a few weeks, in about a month, it has sold way more than that $20 million that they advanced him. And so the twist to this is that after they've published your work, you are entitled to royalties going forward, and it is indefinite. All right. As long as that book stays in the market, they will print it after they exhaust copies. You will always earn royalties, which is typically between 5 and 15%. But before you start to earn royalties, they will deduct all the costs, right? The upfront you were paid, the production cost, all of it will be deducted from the revenue before you start to earn royalties. Incidentally, just yesterday, someone I know sent me a publishing contract that a traditional publishing company in one of the European countries, right, sent to him. And in that contract, they are offering him 12% royalty paid annually. All right. So this is one of the major differences between traditional publishing and the other types, because the margin of return is usually very low. Hardly does it exceed 15%. In fact, hardly does it get to 15%, really. All right. Now, the other thing is that the publisher owns the rights, the rights to the print copies, the digital copies, even movie rights, right? So this is one area that Nigeria's publishing industry is still evolving into, which is movie adaptation of books, all right, especially fictional work. But it's something that happens in Hollywood a lot. Most movies that you watch, they will tell you this is either based on a real life story or based on a book. Some of them fictional works, some memoirs. In fact, just last weekend, I watched one, A Journal for Jordan. Anybody who has seen that book? In fact, after watching it and realizing it was an adaptation, I went to look up the author of that work, Dana somebody, right? So very, very impressive work. So in the event that the book is later adapted into a movie, the publisher still owns the rights of that while you continue to earn your royalties. All right. Now, moving on. What are the pros and cons of this? First, prestige and credibility, because yes, these publishing houses are established. They've been around for years. They built a wide network with media houses, with libraries, with whatever. So they have that wide reach where they're able to send your book. It's like you can become, in quotes, an overnight success, right? Because they're able to take on your job and push it. But your job must be worth it, in that sense. And then access to professional teams. They have well-established teams, editing, design, marketing, all of it. And then wide distribution, of course, third parties like they have networks even within the movie industry to be able to adapt your book in the event that it is a fictional piece and it is worth be getting adapted. In Nigeria, I know a few of such books. I can think of Smart Money Woman, right, by Arese Ugu. Very brilliant book. But of course, the author had to push for that. She had to establish the networks herself. That was not done. I think it was only a self-published work or so, right? So that was not done by a publisher because the industry here is still evolving. And these are some of the things that as a company, we're trusting that over time, we're going to be able to, we're going to come into a position where we can start to influence some of these things that happen in other climes to begin to happen around here, right? So networks with media houses for pushing the projects. That's why you get certain books. You see certain books getting listed on New York Times, on Washington Post as bestseller, and all of those things. That's because these guys have the reach and the network for it. What are the cons? It is highly competitive. A lot of manuscripts get rejected. You don't even want to know how many. A lot get rejected because once they look at it, first few pages, you're not making sense or it's not making commercial. It's not looking like it has high potential value in the market. They toss your work aside. And then the timeline for when you submit your manuscript to when it goes into publication can be as much as 1 year, sometimes 2 or even 3 years. Trust me on that. You can do your checks. Right? And then the author has less creative control. The publisher literally runs everything, right, about that work. Once you submit, you sign that contract, you hand over the rights, they determine the cover. Sometimes they can even change the title. We have a case of such, right? A client that we ghost wrote for, right? So he's working with a traditional publisher in the UK, and they changed the title straight. And it's not, of course, they're not doing it from a vindictive place. They're doing it from a place of knowing the market, being active players in that space. So they are able to advise on what title they believe will work best. Sometimes they can change your title. And let me digress to say this. And this is a problem I see very often, even with us, when authors can come to us, their minds are made up, sort of, right, around their titles, around, so why are you coming to a professional in the first place? You want professional guidance and professional advice. Last week, Monday or Tuesday or thereabout, was it the week before? I'm not sure. We gave this sort of advice to one of our authors. We said, your title does not work, particularly for the audience you're targeting. You need to rework the title. All right. So these are conversations we'll have every now and then. You talk to a bookstore, a bookseller, they're going to tell you that titles sell books more than anything. I mean, most authors don't realize this. The title of your book does more in selling your book than the content itself. Right. Of course, after the title, then the cover design needs to be apt and all of that. All right. So back to what I was saying, you have less creative control because the publisher can change your title, your cover, whatever. You have that liberty to do that. All right, so that's that about traditional publishing. Now let's talk about self-publishing. This is the DIY model, all right, self-publishing, as the name implies. The author does everything in this case. Or they could hire freelancers, right, for certain specialized areas, but pretty much they do everything. And even when they are hiring freelancers, they are coordinating. So they're sourcing the freelancer, they're coordinating, vetting them, and then liaising with them for effective and efficient delivery and all of that, right? Of course, there are certain pitfalls around this, especially if you're new to the space, you don't even know how to determine a credible freelancer, because not everybody who calls themselves expert are really experts. Trust me, I've been in this space for a while, so I've seen quite a bit. Some people who brandish themselves online as writers or as editors, you give them work, and what they turn out to you is abysmal, to be honest. Now, how this works is that the author writes their book, or they do their own editing, cover design, formatting, printing, everything, like I already described, or you hire a freelancer, whichever, and then they bear the costs of all of that. All right, this is one of the major differences with working with a traditional publisher. They bear the cost, and this can go a range between 500,000 naira to as much as 5 million naira for high quality work. Of course, the 5 million includes, before you get scared, includes your printing cost. All right, and so that depends on how many copies you're printing upfront. For a sizable book, let's say a book of 150 pages, and say you're printing about 1,000 copies, you should be spending the whole inflation in the market. You should be spending somewhere above 2 million naira to print 1,000 copies, right? And then you're hiring experts who are doing your editing, who are doing your cover design, your formatting, all of that. It's going to cost you. And of course, there are certain cost implications as well with marketing the book, all right? Whether you're going social media or other channels. And in this instance, you get to keep as high as 70 to 100% of the sales income. All right. Remember, for traditional, you're getting 5 to 15%, but in this case, 70 to 100. In fact, it's actually 100. 70 is when you're using platforms like Amazon, right? KDP. If you're using digital book platform to publish your work, then of course those platforms keep a percentage of themselves. That's when you get less than 100%. But if you're doing everything yourself, let's say you create your own website and you host your book there, and then you're marketing the physical copies, the hard copies, all of that. Of course, you're keeping 100% of the returns, and you keep all the full rights to that work. All right, the full rights to that work. So that's that for self-publishing. And now the pros and the cons of self-publishing. Of course, you have the full creative control. You have the full creative control of the process. You determine what happens, if you're hiring the freelancers, the experts, right? If they give you work that does not meet your taste or your standard, you have the right and the liberty to refuse that work. And then faster time to market. You can literally publish your book in a few weeks because you're the one coordinating everything. And you have higher earning potential as much as full 100% of the revenue. And then what are the cons? The quality control is the author's responsibility. And whilst that might look like a good thing, it's not always a good thing, all right? Like I said before, if you're new to the market, you're new to this space, you're not even sure who a good editor is. You're pretty much just working with hearsay or word of mouth, or somebody you're following on social media who is always brandishing themselves as an editor, as a writer, or as a graphic designer and the likes. Let me give you an example. Every time in the past, right, where we had accepted a work that we did not design for Amazon Publishing, we always had to redo that work, because most designers, they're freelancers, they design anything or everything. And so they've not built specialized expertise around book as we have. So they just design it as the best know-how. So every time you go to Amazon, which is very strict on specifications and all of that, we have to redo the work until we got to the point where we said, no, if we did not design it, we will not handle your digital publishing. Get someone else to do it, so that it doesn't make business sense for us in that regard. So that was just one example to let you know how that sometimes quality control issues in this if you're self-publishing. And then it's harder to get bookstores acceptance, all right? And of course, if you're able to get a bookstore that has a wide reach, right, especially a wholesaler, to adopt your book, then your book can go farther and wider. It can go it can travel across states, and then people can access your book and read it. But before you can achieve that, there are certain things that bookstores look at, which as a self-publisher, you may not know. And then when you go to them with your book already printed, they're telling you, no, this will not work. That's not to say with extensive research or consultations, you cannot achieve it. But again, these are the cons, right? Hybrid publishing. Now, this is the part that is new to most people. And like I did say when I was introducing the conversation, this is a blend between traditional publishing and self-publishing. And a good number of Nigerian publishers play in this space, right? And not very many people realize that this is what is happening, or this is the space that they're playing in. So this is a blend between both. And in this case, the publisher is providing the requisite services that the author needs, so that the author does not have to source for providers of these services themselves, as in the case of self-publishing. However, the publisher is not footing all the financial costs, as in the case of traditional publishing. All right, so this is that middle ground between the two, traditional publishing and self-publishing. All right, that's why it's called hybrid publishing. The good thing about hybrid publishing is that the publisher provides all the expertise that the author needs, and then they have the network to be able to push the book to bookstores, to libraries, and then different, even custom marketing, as we provide, right? So I'll tell you what custom marketing is in a bit. So by the way, this is the space that Clasier Publishing plays in. We're hybrid publishers, right? We're a hybrid publishing company. So first, a hybrid publisher, like a traditional publisher, does not accept every book, does not accept every manuscript. That's why if you go on our website and you look at our service packages and everything, we have a form there that you will fill and give us and submit an excerpt, right, of your manuscript for consideration. So we have to look at that manuscript and think, okay, this manuscript is something we can push. or it's something that will make a business sense to us before we accept it. And that's the model for hybrid publishing. If it does not meet that, then we're happy to turn you down. Well, I hope that didn't come out harshly, but that's what it is. All right. So a hybrid publisher considers your manuscript, and there are times when the manuscript needs, in fact, these are conversations we have very often really at Clasier. There are times when the manuscript requires improvement, right? Having looked through the author submission. And so we get a set up meeting with them and we say, okay, having looked at your work, this is what we think. This is what we think. In fact, like 2 weeks ago, I had a call with a prospective client who came to us, having looked at his work, and that's what I was telling him. I said, no, you need to work on this, work on that, work on this, right? So because we understand the market, we understand what makes a book tick, what readers are looking out for in a book. And so we want to provide you that expertise. But if you feel like, no, my book is good as it is, then we're happy to say we cannot work with you, right? Because this will be, in quote, a liability in our hands. We'll not be able to really push your book because we have a network of bookstores that help to push our book. We have media houses that we're in partnership with to push our works and all of that. So it's very important that we have the confidence in your work that we're able to push it. All right. So publisher accepts only quality work, and then the author pays for the services. And then, of course, the publisher helps with promotion and marketing, like I said, as well as distribution. And then there's the financial commitment can be as much as 2 million to 5 million naira. This is inclusive of the printing costs. I already gave you a brief breakdown earlier. So providing all the requisite services, the editing, the designs, the marketing materials and assets, and the printing, the digital publishing, the marketing, the promotion, all of that, can go, usually will range between this value. In the West, typically this hybrid publishers charge between $5,000 and $10,000, right? In the US now, using US dollar, between $5,000 and $10,000 to be able to provide a very adequate and excellent service to author. And then the author retains the income from their work, right? So every hybrid publisher has their own model. I'll just tell you how we do ours here. So for the first 1,000 copies, right, we don't take anything from the income. You keep all of that. But after we've sold 1,000 copies, what we do is we now sign a contract with you just to ensure that your book stays in the market, right? Because there'll be need to reprint. So we sign a contract with you where it is we keep a percentage, so 50% really. You get 50% of the sales on your book. We get 50%, and that 50% covers reprints after exhausting copies in the market. So that's years on, your book stays in the market. All right. This is another downside to self-publishing. Most times it takes a while, maybe as much as 2 years even, to sell out a couple of copies that the author printed, and there is no program around reprinting and making sure that the book stays perpetually in the market. Ideally, a book should be a timeless piece. Long after the author is gone, the book should still be in the market. And that's where publishers come in. They help you make sure that your book never goes out of circulation. All right. So what are the pros and the cons? Again, full expert and professional support, professional level production, quality, and then the author is involved in the creative process. Yeah. So the publisher will advise you. Say, okay, in fact, just about 3 weeks ago or so, an author reached out to us and said, oh, I already have a cover for my book. We're like, okay, sure, let's see it. And then we said, professionally speaking, this design will undersell your book. All right. So we had to give her that feedback, but she has to be involved. The author is always involved in the process, right? It's a collaborative undertaking with your publisher when you're working with a hybrid publisher. And one of the cons, it's still cost intensive because you have to make an upfront commitment to the publishing of your work. And then now this is very important, what I'm about to say now. Hybrid publishers, most of them are vanity presses or vanity publishers. That's what they're called in the space. And what this means is that they charge you high and they give you low quality on the one hand. Second hand, they charge you high or they bid you high, and they are not committed to the success of your book. A few years ago, someone reached out, someone I know, right? But she had published her book with a publisher in Lagos. And then she came to me and said, this guy said they were going to market my book, but what they're doing is rubbish, right? And so she asked if we could help her to market her work. So this happens a lot. And the Nigeria's publishing space is littered with such people, right? Yeah, and in the industry they're called vanity presses. They show little to no commitment to the success of your book, right? Helping to get your book out there and all of that. So this is one thing to look out for. This is one thing to look out for when you're working with a hybrid publisher. For us, for example, we're currently still looking for ways to expand our distribution channels. Just last Tuesday, I had a meeting with another prospective distributor. We're still looking forward to establishing new contacts, right? Expanding our network so that we ensure that our authors succeed. Now, this is one of the things to look out for. There should be commitment on the part of the publisher so that you don't just put out your book and that's it. No, you're not working with a publisher. You're working with some guy who wants to make money, or some people who are just looking to make money off the author. And then, of course, the author is also involved in the marketing, because whatever the publisher is doing is centered around the author. So let's say the publisher sets up an interview for you, or with on radio or on TV. The author has to show up, right? So everything is collaborative. Sometimes the author wants to, the publisher can recommend, let's say, a coaching program or something for that author to be able to push that work, or consulting or speaking engagement, whatever. The author just has to be fully involved in that process. And then, to give an example, Forbes Books is a very apt example of this. I don't know if you know this, but Forbes has a publishing division, and it was launched just a few years ago. I think around 2018 or thereabouts. That's when that division was set up. So Forbes Books, that's what they called. What they do is, of course, they leverage the expansive network of their parent brand, the Forbes Media brand itself, and to be able to push authors' works. I know somebody personally who published with Forbes Books a few years ago, and he told me that the cost was quite high. It was even above this $10,000 I told you about. And but the returns were worth it, because they worked with him to make sure that I think the book joined a bestseller list. I'm not sure which one. I know it's on New York Times, but the book came on a bestseller list because of how much they pushed it, right? So again, that bestseller thing is something that we're trusting to be able, that we're hoping in a few years we'll start to see happen in this part of the world. Well, that's outside the scope of this conversation, so let me let that slide. Let's talk about independent publishing. I talked about earlier, and it's a term that is often thrown around in the industry, and most people don't exactly know what it means. And oftentimes it overlaps with self-publishing, used interchangeably, but technically they are not the same thing, all right? Oftentimes this is when an author is acting as a publisher for themselves. That's where it's different. So self-publishing is you just doing your thing. There's no publisher attached to your book by the time it's out, right? There's no publisher name on it. That's a self-published work. Or you don't even print. Sometimes people can use KDP to just post their book, and that's it. Or Ingram Spark, or all of those other platforms. Kobo. In Nigeria, Seller is the only platform we have, unfortunately, right now. Kada Books hit the rocks I think about 2 years ago now, sadly. But in the case of independent publishing, the author act as their own publisher, so they can publish that work under an imprint, under a registered company, all right, or something that they do. And this is especially common with coaches. I see this happen mostly with coaches, all right, than just about anybody. Bishop Oyedepo is an example of that. Dominion Publishing, right? So he created a publishing house as an independent publisher because they publish strictly his books. Until recently, a few years ago, they started to print Bibles. I think Dominion Publishing is the only publishing house in Nigeria that produces Bibles. All right. But again, anyway, so that's still the idea that they serve as publishers to themselves, and over time they might adopt other people. In fact, just last week, I was introduced to a publisher, a Nigerian based in the US, who runs a publishing. And when I looked at their operations, I could tell that this is independent publishing. So the woman started out publishing her own work. She's a pastor, and then doubles as a coach. And so she started out, created a publishing brand, publishing her own works, and now she's beginning to accept other works, right? Another person I can think of is, if you know Wendy Ologe, that is another good example. She's a parenting coach. So she produces her books, or she publishes her books under her brand, right, as a coach, right? So that is the difference between independent publishing and self-publishing, all right? I hope you get that. So it's a small publishing house that's mainly, and usually it works best when the author, is a serial author. When the person is a serial author, they're publishing multiple books back to back. As in the case of Bishop Oyedepo, who has, I believe right now, it should be up to 100 or more books, and then they provide all those services in-house, professional editing, design, distribution, marketing, all of that, and sometimes they can outsource them, right? Sometimes they can outsource some of these things. They just have like a network of experts or freelancers that they work with, establish partnerships with, to do their works. Other times, if they have the expertise themselves, let's say they're editors themselves, good ones, then they can go ahead to edit their works themselves and all of that. Then, of course, the cost and the royalties, even the rights are the same as self-publishing. The author keeps the rights, all they foot the cost for the production, and all the returns 100% goes to them, as long as they're not using maybe some outsourced platforms like KDP and the likes. All right, so they fully own everything. So that's that about independent publishing, otherwise called indie publishing. Okay, just a moment. I'm going to turn back to my slide. All right, so that's about summed it up for us. Here is a bonus slide. I just want to tell you something called the Big Five, the global Big Five of publishing. All right, so just to recap, I started by defining what book publishing is, and then we now talked about the three publishing models, really. Independent publishing is an add-on, as it were, but generally speaking, there are three publishing models: self-publishing, traditional publishing, and hybrid publishing. I distilled all of those to you. And now the bonus I am adding is the global Big Five of publishing. Just if you're aware of consulting, right? I mean, the consulting world, they have what they call the Big Four. Now, these five names you're seeing here control the book publishing market globally, and I mean globally, right? So Penguin Random House, they published what's the name? Chimamada's book recently. However, it was not Penguin that directly published it. It's one of their imprints, I think North or something. All of these guys have they have loads of smaller brands under them that publish different, they are focused on different aspects. Yeah, they focus on different genres, I should say. Focus on different genres. Lots and lots of imprints, lots of subsidiaries, smaller publishing houses, right? Formerly there were six. Penguin was an independent publishing house itself. Random House was another. I think it was in 2013 or so where they merged, and then it became Penguin Random House. We have HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Hachette Book Group, and Macmillan Publishers. These are the movers and shakers of the industry globally. Their network is wide. They publish thousands of titles every year. I mean, literally thousands of titles. Another thing I should say about hybrid publishing that escaped me earlier is hybrid publishers don't publish every genre, so they are always specialized. They are always specialized. All right, maybe fiction, and even fiction, they could have a few subgenres that they are focused on, or they focus on non-fiction, but again, they have specified subgenres that they focus on. And that's one thing to know about hybrid publishers. And then even traditional publishers, they usually will have imprints. They're called imprints. They are subsidiaries, smaller publishing houses, publishing companies under the parent company. And it happens even in Nigeria, right? Think of Owida Books, think of Farafina, think of Parasia. They have imprints. They have smaller divisions, units that are specialized on different genres. Owida Books, for example, is it Tanya? I think Tanya is what they call it. They are children book imprints. All right, so but those are traditional publishers. But again, I should say this. So additional thoughts coming to mind. Let me just say this last. Most traditional publishers still offer hybrid publishing options. So sometimes when they look at your book and they feel like, okay, there's a potential here, but it's not enough to get our buy-in. All right, to get us to adopt your manuscript, they can offer you what they call a self-publishing option. But really, what that option is a hybrid publishing, because it now means that you are footing the costs while they provide the expertise and then they help you push the book. That is hybrid. All right, so sometimes you will see that traditional publishers also offer this self-publishing model, which really is hybrid, because they are providing all the expertise and then you are, as the author, you're footing the cost. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. Truly appreciate it, and I hope it was worth your time investment.